Welcome to the Business Mechanics Show. This is your host, Vaughn Sigmund. Today, we're going to be talking about how to have difficult conversations. I've done previous videos, blogs, podcasts on how to deal with difficult people. We're going to dig down into more on how to have the conversation, the tips, tricks, vital behaviors, best practices to having difficult conversations in a way that will produce very positive outcomes. Let's talk a little bit about human nature for a minute. Whether we're dealing with underperformers at work, a situation that's gone wrong at work, our spouse, our boss, a difficult client, we have in our human nature a desire to avoid those kind of conversations. It's in our DNA, fight or flight. And today I'm going to help you with a proven step-by-step approach for how to become more confident, less stressed, and create improved outcomes from having difficult, what is maybe after this not going to be so difficult, but what we perceive today in our current mindset, difficult conversations. I've practiced this for over 20 years myself, and in my leadership roles, I've trained hundreds and hundreds of managers on this process and approach, and I want to be able to share that with you today. I think it'll be a huge value to you. So let's talk about what a difficult conversation is. A difficult conversation is anything you find hard to talk about due to fear of consequences. And it's those consequences, those outcomes that we have got to change our mindset on. That's the dilemma, is do we avoid or do we confront, fight or flight? But as a leader in an organization, as a manager and a leader, if we avoid the problem, well, we tend to begin undermining our leadership, self-destructive. But we also work on our own confidence, because if we avoid it, we don't confront it, we don't take care of the situation, we don't change the course of something, we don't get across what needs to get across, will often in the end feel taken advantage of. That's not a very good feeling either. And sometimes our feelings will fester, those will build and build, and that starts working on us, starts working on our confidence. And more importantly, it robs us and whoever else is involved in an improved or successful resolution to the situation or the challenge. We also worry that if we confront the problem, things could get worse. So you don't want to have that in your mind, but you probably do today. I'm just going to avoid it. Maybe it'll fix itself. And friends, it never fixes itself, ever. It only continues or gets worse. So in order to gain confidence, you've got to change you. The only person who can fix this, of course, is you. And you've got to change your mindset first. And the tips I'm going to share with you today, the process, the steps I'm going to give you are going to be the first actions you can begin taking as a leader, as a manager, to take things into control in a way with the blueprint to change your thinking and give you confidence in having these difficult conversations. Now, the reason why we avoid them is, again, fear of consequences, and we also have a catastrophic mindset. We very often, naturally, if we're not hugely optimistic, hugely confident, well, this catastrophic mindset that most humans, if not all humans, possess, we fear something really bad happening or something negative happening. That's the consequences I talked about earlier. There's a fear. And I often have said this, that fear can also be an acronym for false expectations appearing real. False expectations appearing real. So the key to all of this, and to avoid these false expectations appearing real, you got to shift your message delivery from a delivery stance to a learning stance. That's the first key to all this, is we've got to change how we go into these conversations, where our thoughts and mind are going into these conversations. Really, every difficult conversation is 3 conversations. Now, some of these conversations are going to be internal, but let me talk about what these 3 conversations are. So it's we want to go in and find out what happened. We know what we've heard, maybe even what we've seen. Maybe a project didn't get hit on time, or there was some disruption in the workplace, or something's gone wrong. And we know what we know. What we don't know is what the other person knows. And so that creates the first problem of going into a difficult conversation, is we don't know what the other person was thinking. Maybe what that other person was instructed on. There's this internal disagreement about what really happened. We know our side, but we don't know their side. So mindset number 1 that you have to alter is you've got to go into it with the first part of the conversation is, I've got to understand what happened from their perspective. And then you also have to understand there's the feelings part of a difficult conversation. Each conversation takes into account feelings and self-esteem. Even if they're not addressed, they leak in, right? That your self-esteem is always there. It's a powerful force within all of us. That self-esteem creates the confidence. We sometimes, if we have any kind of weakened self-esteem in a situation or in our role, we feel less confident. We often will allow ourselves to feel attacked or triggered by something. So if I go into it with a mindset that I got to figure out what happened, I know that my feelings are what they are. I don't know what their feelings are. And for the purposes of this discussion, we have to keep in mind our self-esteem. Keep that in mind. You've got to keep your ego in check in all this, that they're not attacking you. This isn't a personal attack on you. It's just a situation. But before you can make any decision, before you allow those feelings internally to come into you, you've got to find out the other side of things. So now what do you need to do? Well, let's think about what you can do and what you can't do, what you can change and what you can't change. And what you can change is the way you respond to each of these challenges, because your response is never caused by somebody else. You choose your response. It happens in a nanosecond, but it's how you have been wired. And you can rewire yourself. Because the only reason why you respond with a personal attack, or it being against you, or however you respond with anger or frustration or avoidance, that's all created by you, not by them. So we got to own that. And once we own that, we can now explore and gain the information we need by questioning. We got to go into it with a learning mindset. Not a accusation or a fault mindset, but a learning process. We cannot assume the other side. It's easy to do. All we need to do is not assume. If you can change that first thing, is don't assume you know everything when you go into conversations, is the first big step you've got to take. Now, moving to the next part of this. What do you need to do? Well, the what happened conversation. What's the story here? Again, we got to check our assumptions, and we're looking for the truth, not just our truth, if you will. We're going to understand all of the information we need to understand all of the truth. And if we fail to ask questions, which we often do, is to ask questions under the first big misstep, which is our assumptions. That is always, I'm right is the first assumption we have to dissipate. Listen, nobody likes to be wrong, but arguments are all about, I'm wrong, you're wrong, I'm right, you're right, this is wrong. It's a disagreement about who's right and who's wrong. And very often those disagreements can be quelled if we just get enough information from each other. Because we don't want to be embarrassed by being wrong. So if I let them tell me first before I play my cards, I don't play a bad card. I don't release or reveal my assumption that may or may not be wrong. Sometimes it's just not complete. So get the other perspective, get all the information you can with this learning mindset about the situation. And then, and only then, once you've gathered all the information, you can fact check your own assumption as to whether you're right or not and share your side of things. Because the big hitch is you're not always right. And difficult conversations are almost never about accurate facts. When they go wrong, it's because the facts are not all on the table. They're about conflicting perceptions, if you will, interpretations, lack of information. And the goal in all this, and going in with a learning mindset, an open mind, but you're not right, is you want to create a pool of collective knowledge. Imagine that, a pool of collective knowledge. I want to get as many data points, put it into the pool as I can, so that I know all the perspectives, all the things that everybody else saw this, their thoughts, their experience, what they saw, what they heard, what they were instructed to do, anything that might have gotten in the way, altering instructions, lack of information. Get all that into the pool. And then once you have all that information, then we can start creating a path forward. But lacking any of that, you run the risk of looking foolish, certainly being slightly, if not grossly misinformed, or flat out being wrong. And believe me, I've caught myself in that situation far more times than I care to admit. And it's embarrassing. And it's a really bad look. When you're wrong on your assumptions and you play your card too soon, then somebody corrects you. Then you've eroded your leadership, eroded the trust in others. And you also have to keep in mind the intention. The error we make in intentions is fairly simple, is we assume we know the intentions of others, why they did it, when in fact we don't, not unless we ask and understand, because intentions are invisible until we put them into the pool of collective knowledge. But we can assume intentions, we make them up. We can convince ourselves what another person's intention is. But sometimes we're wrong, and you want to make sure you do the fact checking on that and don't get caught being wrong on somebody else's intention. I've often had my mind changed by using this process. Think about the times that you've, in the end, after you've maybe stuck your neck out a little bit and had a difficult conversation, and later on you found out that there was missing information, that it really wasn't all this person's fault. How do you go fix that? All the feelings are now bruised. The engagement could have been snipped. And that's an almost impossible battle to win once that's there. The other thing you have to avoid is the blame frame. I'm rhyming a lot today. So that error is we make when during difficult conversations, difficult situations, we go in wanting to find out who to blame. Forget about that. Put blame on the shelf. Don't worry about blame. You want reasons, but you don't want blame. Because if we can find the reasons, we might be able to change the course of things in the future to make sure it doesn't happen again. If we focus on the cause of a problem versus blaming someone on it, then we can start working on correcting it. Maybe fixing something in our process of communication or delegation or what have you to create a future, more positive approach to things. And also, I can't stress this enough. These difficult, fierce, hard conversations, ones we tend to avoid or put off, we do it because of feelings. We don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. And we have some level of fear, which creates avoidance on our part, or we go into it wanting to get it over with. And it's that rush to judgment, if you will, rush to get this conversation over with. I'm going to tell you the way it is, and then we're going to get out of here. Nothing gets accomplished by that. And as a leader, when things go wrong, it's okay. Find out what created the mistake or the situation. And let's then start finding out ways we can avoid that in the future. But these feelings that you can create, not only in yourself, but mostly in others, is very important, because there's an old saying, it's not about what you say, but how you make people feel. And I've seen it many, many times and I had this discussion, old George, he used to be one of the best employees we had. For years, he's been a really good employee. And then all of a sudden, a few months ago, George really just started getting lazy and showing up late and not doing his job very well. And gosh, I don't know why. Well, I can tell you, when I've had the opportunity to dig into that, go talk to George, that's one thing that people don't think about doing. Let's go talk to George and find out why. We want to talk about George. We don't want to talk with George. And when we sit down with George, if he trusts us enough to share his experiences, his feelings, we will often find that this change in his behavior, their behavior, all led back to a difficult conversation that went wrong. It snapped the engagement, it snapped the trust, it snapped their motivation. Or it's happened often enough that George is like, I'm just going to come to work. All that motivation I had before, nobody appreciates it. You accuse me of this. I didn't do that. I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm just going to keep my head down and do my job. And that was unintentional on whoever did it. Generally, a manager created that scenario. But you made George feel unappreciated, distrusted. There's a lack of relationship there where George could share his side. Because understand, another deep, deep element in all of us is our need to be heard. And when we put people in situations where we have a difficult situation and we're having a difficult conversation, is they just want to be heard. And if you shift to a learning stance going into these situations and stop struggling with who's right, and we explore each other's stories, and avoid this whole, you're the problem, that was the problem. Let's just find out what the hell happened and drop the whole blame thing. And then we can make sense of the situation, because then we know what happened. What led to this? Difficult conversations often are where attitudes, perceptions collide. And they collide with the other person's story. Let's avoid that collision by creating the pool of collective knowledge. And this is we hear about this term all the time, is soft skills. And one of the key soft skills every great leader has is their ability to listen. Actively listen. Listening is not being quiet long enough to get your point in. And I giggle a little bit about that, but it's the way most people think is a good way to listen. And that is not active listening. I've got a whole nother video and podcast on that too. But active listening skills is about asking questions, probing questions, making sure you've got all the information. It's healthy communication. It's letting the other person share their side so that you can understand them, so that you can then have the right to be understood. And almost every time, literally 99.9% of the time, if we allow the other person with us to share their side of things, it dissipates any kind of wall that they may be putting up to us, for us. It keeps that wall down. So then we can have a two-way conversation or a three-way conversation, however many people are involved. But we got to create that pool of collective knowledge. We've got to get their ideas. We've got to get their experience, got to get their thoughts on things. So you've got to be patient. You can't be thinking about the next thing you're going to say as part of active listening. You've got to really be curious and interested and understand as much as you can, probe and get as much information as you can before because often you have to reformulate your thoughts. You have to reformulate your perception before you can really address this and come out with a positive conclusion. Because we've got to avoid the collision. The collision is when their story is very different from our story. And that creates the arguments. And we've got to avoid arguments at all costs. If somebody wants to argue with us, we've got to shut that down, because as soon as we started arguing, there's no listening. There's no good can come of that conversation, because all at that point we're trying to do is be right. And then we just start trading a bunch of conclusions with each other and pointing fingers, and nothing ever good comes of that. So we've got to avoid the argument. If you go into a difficult conversation and the other person engages and wants to create an argument out of this, shut it down, time it out. Let's come back at it tomorrow. And also for you, if you go into a difficult conversation with your emotions high, don't go into the conversation. Put it off. Use my favorite rule, which is the 24-hour rule. Give it a day. Give it a day. Come at it tomorrow. Make sure your emotions are down. You come at it with a more rational mindset, open mindset. And it also gives you time to plan a little bit. Think through what you're going to ask, what you need to discover, maybe even start writing down some thoughts and questions. It gives you time to unpack your assumptions and perceptions, question them. You always have to question them. Maybe I'm missing something. And then go into the conversation. And your perceptions may be right, but you will never be right until the other person gets to share their side of things. That's key. So we've got to just avoid any kind of argument, because that is just a gigantic waste of time and it inhibits change. It's not going to happen. Not going to happen. Because they have different information than we have. It may be slight, but it may be important too. So avoid the argument. Go into it with an open, inquisitive mindset. Second mistake is we don't really hear what they're trying to say. That's the active listening part. So Make sure that you understand how to ask open-ended questions that aren't leading or accusatory. Who, what, when, where, how. Tell me more. Tell me about the situation. What were your thoughts? What were you thinking? What happened? What did you see? What did you hear? What happened before that? What happened after that? You always have to keep your view, your perceptions as a hypothesis. It may be the reason, it may be the situation, or it may not. You have to keep it as just that, a hypothesis. And then you have to be prepared for a paradigm shift. Paradigm shift. For purposes of making sure we all understand what a paradigm shift is, the definition is an important change that happens when what you were thinking about or your opinion on something is replaced by a new and different thought or opinion created by new information. I'll give you an example of that. If any of you have ever read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, the very first chapter talks about paradigm shifts and how that's one of those effective habits of highly successful people is they've got to be open to information. And the story he shares in the first chapter around paradigm shifts is a man in New York City gets on a bus with 3 of his kids. And he gets in and he sits down and the kids are running up and down the aisle of the bus, creating havoc, knocking things over, running into people, screaming and yelling, and just acting crazy. And everybody on the bus is watching this and why doesn't this father do something about that? That man needs to get in control of his kids. This is a problem. What a bad father that is. And then finally, a man sitting next to him on the bus says, "Sir, do you not see what your kids are doing? You need to get control of that." And the man looks up and kind of shakes his head a little bit and says, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'm sorry. We just left the hospital. Their mother has just passed away this morning. And, you know, I've got a lot of things to think about. And I guess that's just how they're dealing with it. Sorry, let me get this taken care of." Paradigm shift. You just got new information that changed your perception from him being a bad father to complete empathy. He just lost his wife and they lost their mother. So a dramatic example, I get it, but those have happened to me so many times in these kind of conversations. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, now I understand. But I never would have known and never would have had my paradigm shift had I not started asking questions. So the 4 steps that work this is a gold standard here for mutual understanding. Step 1, you have to have a curiosity mindset, don't assume. 2, listen actively, ask probing questions, create the pool of collective knowledge. Then and only then can you share your thoughts, your experience of how you saw it. And now that you have all the information, it may alter what you thought because now we have some reality. And then the 4th step is then we can start creating and offering solutions, some changes for improved outcomes. We can create a win-win outcome versus a blame, wrong, right outcome. But you can only do so if you have a curiosity mindset, probe, get all the information you can, create the pool of collective knowledge. Then you get to share your ideas, your experience, your thoughts on this, your side of things. And then you always have to end the conversation with, okay, this has gone wrong, or this is the situation. This is key, folks. What can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again? Let's not come back here again. What do we need to do? We need to do in order to make sure this doesn't happen again. That's the win-win. Let's create a solution, an improved outcome for the future. Listen, probe, share your side, create a solution. 4 steps. Easy steps. But let me tell you, our typical opening will never help. Because if we start these conversations with our story as being the foundation of how this is going to go, we trigger some really bad things in the person we're having the conversation with, and you're never going to get anywhere. So just don't. You've got to make sure that they understand your purposes in all this is to resolve a situation, create an improved outcome, not assign blame, be able to share your thoughts and perspectives on things, and let's partner on figuring things out. Let's work together on figuring things out. If you have somebody in one of these conversations that chooses not to engage, it's nothing, they're just being quiet, they won't talk to you. Well, you got to be persistent. And you've got to find the key to get them to open up. You just have to. And if they're so worked up today about this conversation, wait till tomorrow. Ask them to go think about it and tell them that it's not an option not to talk about this. We got to discuss it. So please go home, gather your thoughts, think about this situation. I'm really interested in learning your side of things. I've got to learn your side of things. Let's get back together. Let's reconvene tomorrow and talk about it so that we can come out with a successful resolution. That doesn't happen often, frankly, but be prepared for it if it does. Another key to all this is watch your body language. It's hard enough to remember, okay, I've got to change my mindset. I can't be going in thinking I'm right. I have to ask all these questions. But one of the things that is nonverbal that you've got to be really careful is your body language. Make sure you appear open. You're making eye contact. You got to watch your facial expressions. Do not clue your cards. Be careful about responding in ways that's indicating a negative thought on your part or a disagreement on your part. You've got your body and your face has to remain fairly neutral and engaging. Be careful with that. A lot to remember, isn't it? So, in conclusion, you may or may not, you probably have, we all have some level of guilt in displaying these kind of ineffective behaviors and having difficult conversation when we're working with others. And the only way we're ever going to get better is practice it. Just start practicing it. And slow. You're going to make mistakes. It's not going to go well. Learn from that. Try it again, try it again, try it again. Nothing good in our lives ever comes easy. And this is going to be hard for many people who want to commit to improving their ability to have hard conversations with people. So practice it. I've given you the 4 steps. You've got to stop and intentionally think about before you go, and you need to plan. Remember the competency curve. And many of you are going to be on the consciously incompetent side of the competency curve. So plan, know that you're not prepared for everything that's going to come at you. But have a plan, have your questions, be prepared for it not to go very well. Learn from that, come back at it again, but keep practicing. Stop and intentionally think beforehand how this is going to go, remembering bad habits that you have to avoid before you go in there. The key to all of it is listening, asking and truly listening. That is the magic dust to all of this. If you don't, you erode your credibility, you erode trust, you erode the faith they have in you and your leadership. It creates a lot of discourse and disengagement. Conversely, if you handle these conversations, if you're become a softer place to fall when things go wrong, well, people are going to love you. People are going to respect you. People want to do more for you. That's the value of all this. People work for people. They don't work for your company. They work for you. And the more your people can trust you, and creating these kind of environments when things are going wrong is going to create this improved level of respect and trust that is unstoppable. That's a huge force that you'll now possess in your leadership toolbox. Your results in bringing about change and improvement will soar. but it takes time. It takes practice. And unbelievably, in a matter of 30, 60, 90 days, depending on how much you get the opportunity to practice this, when things go wrong, you have to have one of these difficult conversations that before you would have avoided or delayed. They become so easy to have. They're so much easier. Whether it's with a direct report, a peer, your boss, you'll have so much more confidence. That confidence just bleeds out into everything you do and with everyone you work with. So thank you all very much for listening to the show today. I look forward to seeing you all again in the next week's podcast or video. Reach out to me if you have any questions on this. If you got a scenario that you'd like to discuss with me, I'd be happy to have that conversation with you. We can get a free 30-minute phone call with each other and we can discuss that. Email me, Vaughn@rdltraining.com. Email me and let's talk. Visit our website. I'd love for you to go and check out all of our programs. rdltraining.com, Romeo Delta Lima Training.com. Look at our catalog of services and training programs, all the great things we offer. And I look forward to seeing you all again in the very near future. Thanks for coming today.